Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Team Training Tuesday presented by Fitz Design. Today's topic is sympathy, keepsake sympathy to be more specific, and we're really excited to have you join us today. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me and see me. So if you are having any technical difficulties, there's an actual little space where you can type in a message. Go ahead and let Jamie know on the other end that you're having some technical difficulties, and we can get those worked out before we begin. So if you're having that, now's your chance. I think that means everybody's up and going. And if you ever run into any problems where maybe the webinar shuts down or something, you can always call the office and they'll help you get back online again, because we don't want you to miss anything. So, like I said, we're talking about sympathy today, and sympathy is a really large part of our floral business. And we've seen somewhat of a decline in the sympathy business over the past few years due to a lot of different influences, but mainly is because the way things are being done with funerals are changing, which means we also have to change. And another thing we're seeing, and a good thing we're seeing, is the return of the celebration of life ceremonies. And that means we have a new opportunity to capture a whole new market of funeral flower buyers. And so we're gonna show some items today that incorporate some of our Fitz Design keepsake items, because that personalization and that making that connection from the family to their loved one is really very vital in building your sympathy business and building long-term customers. Another thing is we know that flowers eventually fade, and the keepsake items don't. So they'll always have that lasting tribute to their loved one when you incorporate something that is a keepsake item. Our first project today is featuring one of our memory stones. And I'm sorry, my computer's kind of far away so that you can see everything that's going on. But it's one of our memory stones. And the verse on this one is called, "If Tears Could Build a Stairway." And on the back of it, it also has a clip in which you can hang this on the wall afterwards, or it also will sit nicely on a tabletop. So it actually has a couple ways to display it following the funeral. We're going to add that into our container here. And here you see I have kind of a garden-inspired container, kind of a wrought iron metal with some burlap handles. I've already went ahead and filled it with my foam. Now I'm going to be using permanent botanicals today for my display, but this could easily be translated into fresh flowers. So I've secured this in using the hot melt glue. And if you notice, my foam does not come up very high above the rim of the container. That's because of the type of design I'm going to do. I'm going to do something very organic and natural with vertical placements. And therefore, I don't need a lot coming out horizontally. And so I don't want my foam to come up too high, because if my foam were too high above my container, that means I need to cover it. And if I need to cover it, that means I need to use a lot more product. And we do have to be cost conscious when we're creating sympathies designs. Most people come to us with a budget. And so our goal and our job is to create a most beautiful and as large as tribute as we possibly can. We need to stretch their budget as much as we can. And this type of design that you'll see where I'm using vertical placements, I'm also going to be using some groupings, will help me spread that budget by making the flowers more impactful by grouping them together. But first we need to prepare the base. So I've got the foam, and now I want to place my memory stone where I want it. Now, it might be a little bit hard for you to see, but if I were to put it directly even, horizontal with the container, it becomes a little flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to angle it slightly in the placement where I want it to go into the container. And then I'm just going to kind of press that down and make an impression where I want it to sit. And it is left just a little tiny impression for me to see. You probably can't see it, but there's an impression there, so I know exactly where I want it to place once I get it prepared. Now I'm going to use the hook that's provided to my advantage. I'm going to take a couple long hyacinth stakes, and I'm actually going to use, you know, on the hyacinth stick, there's a blunt end, and then there's like a beveled edge, a sharper edge. And I'm going to use that sharper beveled edge and just insert that underneath my hanger. And that hanger is nice and tight, so that will hold it nice and firm there. And I'm going to do the second one, exactly the same. And you can see I've kind of created a V here. So then I'm going to just cut off a little bit of those stems because I don't need them quite that long. I don't want this sticking up above my foam. Now I want to make sure these stay in place, and a quick and easy way to do that is to use one of the U-glue adhesive strips. Simply just peel off only one of the backings and then place that right over with that hyacinth stick being right in the center and press that down. That's not moving anywhere. That's going to stay nice and secure. And then it will also allow the receiver to remove it without marking or damaging the plaque after the funeral's over. And I forgot to mention, if you have any questions at all of what I'm doing throughout the webinars, please just go ahead and type in your questions, and either Jamie or Dan or myself will get back to you and answer your question. If it can be typed back to you quickly, that's what Jamie will do. But if it's something she feels that I need to address, she'll just interrupt us and ask me your question, and we'll make sure we get that answer for you. So you can see that's how, and they're nice and firm on there. They're not going anywhere. Now that's going to allow me to go ahead and insert this into my foam already where I wanted it to go. I've already had those marked. And now it wobbles a little bit, but it's not coming out. It really is not going to come out. You can see I can tip that right up, and it's not going to fall out. Another good thing about using the hyacinth sticks, when you're using them in the fresh foam, once they get moist, they start to expand. So that helps them hold even more securely into wet foam. So I highly recommend using hyacinth sticks or even the wooden wire picks to secure your keepsakes into your designs. Now I'm just going to take a couple more of these. I'm going to cut them shorter. And I'm just going to put them towards the back. Just going to poke them in to the foam, and maybe one off to the side. Now I do this for a couple reasons. One, it's definitely because I want to add a little more security into that, but also if for some reason this should ever come out of the design, those are the cue of where to put the piece back in. Those are kind of my markers. So now I'm just going to take a little bit of moss. I'm not going to use a lot of it. I'm really going to just put it around. You can see here, I have some spaces here in the front. And I'm just going to use some of that decorative moss in those larger spaces to fill in the gaps. Don't need a lot. I do not cover my entire piece in moss. I know some of you do. But if you're using fresh flowers and you use a lot of moss, keep in mind that moss wicks water. When it gets wet and damp, it will absorb the water. Even if it's put on dry, it will soak up that water, and then it will start to drip. And if that happens, we run the risk of ruining the funeral home's furniture or their carpeting, and we certainly don't want that because we want to build relationships with our funeral directors. We don't want to get them upset with us because we want them to allow us to do creative and fun things in their funeral homes. And if we respect their home, then they'll let us do more fun and creative designs. So I've just got a little bit across the front. Now I'm going to start to add my flowers. And it is springtime, so I've selected some forsythia. Cut off my tags here. We certainly don't want tags. And if you're using permanent botanicals, it's always good to kind of manipulate the flowers when they come straight out of the box and out of the wrapping. Sometimes they're very straight and everything is folded up, and you will want them to look as natural as possible. So I always like to take them and just give them a few little natural bends into their stem. Make sure the flowers are a little bit fluffed out. Now, if I were going to be making this for somebody's home, I'm not going to do it today just for the sake of space, but I would either use a pick from a pick machine, or I would do a little dab into the hot pan glue and then into the foam. That way I'm going to make sure that my flowers on a permanent botanical arrangement, not on a fresh, just a permanent botanical arrangement, is not going to wobble or wiggle loose into the foam. And that sometimes happens, especially with some of the larger, heavy stems that permanent botanicals come into our stores, that really thick, heavy stem. Just for the sake of time today, I'm not going to do that, but that's really what I would do, because I want to make sure that my designs are going to last. I don't know about where you are today, but here we have the lilacs and the forsythia are in full bloom here in New Mexico. Yes, we do have those beautiful flowers here in New Mexico, and they do bloom, and everything is in full bloom right now. So I think that's also a nice thing to do when you're doing your sympathy flowers, is kind of take that cue from nature. And if it's springtime, you know, have available some of those beautiful springtime flowers for you to offer. You know, a lot of gardening is very popular, so there's a lot of people who are very much into gardening, and what a beautiful tribute that would be is to ask the family, you know, what kind of flowers did your grandmother grow in her garden, and maybe we can use some of those in her floral tributes. Same thing as maybe she had a favorite little shovel or a little rake that she used to use, and they could bring that in, and you could add that into a design or two as well. And then, of course, something like this memory stone that they could later put out in her garden or in their garden to always remember their grandmother. When you start asking those stories and you start asking about the life of the person who has passed, you begin to, your creativity can really soar, and you begin to kind of, are able to help paint a picture of their life. Let's see here. To be honest with you, it's been a while since I've designed backwards. I used to do it all the time when I was teaching, but that's been a few years. So you can already see we're getting, you know, quite a nice fill of the flowers, and so far I've only used 6 stems. I've used 2 stems of forsythia, and really if this were fresh forsythia, you'd probably only be on 1 stems, and then I have 3 stems of Gerber daisies. Now I'm going to come back in, and I'm just going to take some of my greenery, and I want to green in a few places. And for this I'm going to use some ivy, because ivy always says garden to me. Anymore, these permanent botanicals that they're designing and creating are just, they're so hard to tell anymore. They're so lifelike. And you know, a little something, permanent botanicals are coming back into vogue, people. I know a lot of us have kind of shied away, especially if we were florists back in the 80s and 90s when all types of permanent botanicals were just really popular. And they kind of, you know, kind of went away for a little while, but they are coming back. A lot of that has to do with our economy, and people like to have something that lasts a little longer, and that's okay. We need to be able to design and create both items and offer both items, because you just never know who's going to walk in that door and what their preferences are going to be. So I would suggest never say, oh no, we can't do that, or we don't do those. And I know that sometimes I've actually heard florists say, oh no, we don't do silk. But you know what? Maybe they, if they would have lost the order. Okay, I'm just going to put a few more pieces back here, and I'll turn it around and let you see how I've covered my back, because that is important. Even though this is more of a one-sided design, we still want to make sure that there's something visually in that back, so it doesn't look like the arrangement just cuts off. And that's true in permanent botanicals or in fresh. You just don't want to cut off and leave the back. See how I've filled in the back. You can still kind of see my hyacinth sticks there, but really where I've added the U-glue strips, that is pretty much covered up with the ivy in the back. Now as I'm designing this, I'm making sure that I don't put a lot in front of the verse, because that's important. That's what's going to draw people into your design, because they're going to want to see what that stone says. And when somebody comes up close and has to actually engage into your design, you're making a real connection, and that's important in floral design. If someone just can stand back and look at it and say, aren't those pretty flowers? That's okay, but when they're actually drawn to the design and come up and look inside of it, that's when you know you've really made that connection. And that connection builds loyalty and respect for our talent, and we want that because, you know, it's important what we do, and it's important that we're not afraid to show that we can create these things. And the more you engage consumers, the more they understand the importance of flowers, and the more they're willing to buy them. So I'm going to put one more Gerber daisy, and I know for you right now you can't really see it because I'm kind of putting it in the back, but when you come up and approach the design, that color of that bright yellow gerbera coming off a little bit behind that stone is very noticeable. So you also, when you're creating a design like this, you want to consider how it's going to be displayed. Is it going to be displayed on a pedestal? Maybe it's much larger and it's going to be displayed on the floor, and people are going to walk up to it. So you may want to actually put it down on the floor when you think you're finished and look down into it, because that's going to tell you where your line and your balance and your rhythm is off when you look down into it. And then you can go ahead and adjust as necessary, so that no matter how somebody is viewing your design, it's going to be pleasing and complete from all angles. Next, I'm just going to add a few ranunculus in. And these are absolutely exquisite as far as permanent botanicals go. But you know, I have been seeing all over Facebook the gorgeous varieties of ranunculus we have these days. How exciting for us that we have these great products available to us that we didn't have available all that long ago. The colors, the petal count on all these flowers really kind of makes our job a lot easier when we have all these glorious products to choose from. Now I'm being conscious because I have a definite line here that I've created with my Gerber daisies, and I don't want to interfere with that too much when I add in my ranunculus. So I'm making sure that each flower has its own space, and it helps create that line that draws the eye down into the focal point of the design. Following our elements and principles is so important when we create designs. You know, we don't often think about them when we're designing. It just becomes second habit to us. But do you know that when somebody views an arrangement, even if they're not have an art background or really have ever heard of the elements or principles, their mind, their subconscious eye can see whether it's right or wrong. They don't know that there's something wrong. They just feel uncomfortable about the design when they look at it. To them, it just doesn't look right for some reason. They don't know if it's off balance. They don't know if it's because the color isn't right. They just know they don't like the design. Chances are it's because there's one or two of the elements or principles that are not done correctly in the design. So we really have to pay attention to that. We can't just take them for granted. We have to be aware of what we're creating and what we're doing. So I've used 1, 2, 3 stems of the ranunculus. And now I'm just going to add in, I have some little miniature spray tulips. Now, of course, tulips don't come like this, but certainly you could use just a few stems of tulips and then maybe fill in with some grass or something of that nature to create the same look that I'm creating here. Because the forsythia really is quite full up here, I don't really need too much coming up high as far as the tulips go. And quite honestly, it wouldn't look natural for a tulip like this. This is really meant to be a low, almost like a ground cover. So for me to try to extend these up into the forsythia would look unnatural. We're really trying to go for an organic look with this design. Kind of like we went right out into grandmother's garden and just dug up a little plot of it and brought it in. Again, I'm going to turn this around because I want you to see that I've added just a couple blossoms to the back. So that way I know when somebody comes up and looks over, it's going to look complete. It's not going to look unfinished or half done. I'm going to make sure I use all my product. And these are just the leftover foliage pieces from the ranunculus that I didn't need after I cut it off, but I'm going to use those. I'm not going to throw away. I'm going to go ahead and put those back here to kind of start covering up a few more of my mechanics. I know when I had my flower shop, I would get so frustrated by all these little bits and pieces, and I found myself doing it even though I knew better, and I taught my staff not to, but I would throw all this stuff because I couldn't throw it away because it was still nice. I'd throw it all in a great big flower box, and then I thought, well, I'll get to that later. Or when I would cut a stem, I would not use every single blossom somehow, and then I would end up with a stem with only, one ranunculus left. And then eventually I learned, because I was younger when I owned my flower shop, and I was still learning the business side of the flower business. And then I realized that I'm paying for that whole stem. If I'm going to use it, I'm going to use the whole stem in a design so that I'm not wasting my money and I'm not throwing one blossom or a couple of the leaves in a box hoping to use them later. But the same principle applies to fresh flowers. When you're creating your sympathy pieces, and this also works for your everyday designs and your wedding designs, that you should be taking into account when you're using a stem, account for the whole stem. Don't put a half a stem in and then the other half a stem back in the bucket, because the next person who's going to pull that is going to look at it and say, oh, that's been chopped on, so I'm just going to add that in for free. Well, you know what? There's no free in every stem and every blossom you've paid for. So you want to make sure when you're taking into account and when you're making your recipes and when you're figuring out what you're going to need, figure things in whole stems so that way you have no waste. And if a flower breaks off and it's a little bit too short, that's okay. We can go ahead and we can add that down to the front to a focal area to bring the color up in front. So there's really never any reason to not use every blossom and every leaf that you get on your stems. And it's much more cost efficient, and you'll actually make sure you're making money on your flowers that way. I'm just going to come back in, add a few more pieces of green. since we're going to use everything, we're not going to waste anything. And I want to be careful. I don't want to really cover that up, but I also want it to look like it's been sitting out in the garden for a while. So if I had everything really forcefully away, pushed back away from the stone, it wouldn't look natural. It would look too planned and arranged. So a little bit kind of coming over the front of it. You can see there's a little stem here of the forsythia that kind of trails over the front, and I have a little bit of greenery, but still the whole thing really can be seen, and it's going to draw the viewer up into your design. Those little details are so important when designing sympathy work. You know, often we hear, well, I'm just going to do a cooler cleaner, and I'm just going to get rid of everything I have because I have this funeral, and I know it's only going to be for a one-day visitation. You know, we really have to get away from that mindset. I remember there was an actual time when we taught that, believe it or not, that to go ahead and use your older flowers or use your cooler, what's left in the cooler. But you know what? The consumers are so much more aware and just so much more savvy these days than they used to be. And they don't accept that anymore, and we shouldn't want that to be the image of our flower shops going out there. When you think about a funeral, you really have a captive audience for hours. And really all they're doing, because there's really not much else to do when you're at a funeral home or you're at a funeral, but to sit and meditate and reflect. And what you're looking at are the flowers when you do that. So it's very important that we use only the best blooms we have, and that we're using the best design that we have and we're able to do, because we're really creating that last impression of a loved one and their family. And that's a very important role that we serve in this process. So don't use old chipped up containers that maybe you've repainted, or something that's cracked or might leak, or older flowers, just because you know it's going to be discarded. Make sure you're using your very best. And then when you do that, you can create something beautiful with a keepsake. That really is a lasting tribute and leaves a lasting impression on all those who see it and those who ordered it. Do we have any questions about this design? Okay. Well, then we're going to move on to our next design then. And again, we're still keeping with that whole garden theme. I think it's appropriate for this time of the year especially, but we're just going to go ahead and say that we're creating these to kind of coordinate and go to the same funeral. So I'm going to set this aside. And clean up my mess here. Get ready for the next one. And please, if you do have a question, there's no such thing as a silly question. Every question is important. Chances are, if you're thinking it, somebody else is thinking it too. We want to make sure that you understand what we're showing you, because I know sometimes it can be hard on a computer screen. So the next piece is a little bit tall, so I'm going to have to kind of do it in segments for you. I apologize for that. I thought I would be able to get this a little, my screen focused in a little better so you could see all of it. In fact, I'm going to adjust just a little bit. Hopefully my light above my table. Hold on one moment for me, please. See if I can. That might be a little better. There we go. Now you can almost see the whole thing. There's still a little bit up here that's out of frame, but this is our next piece. And our next piece is actually going to be a frame that holds our wind chime. I'm going to add this after the design is complete, but I just wanted you to kind of see where we're going with this. Now I'll walk you through how I actually made the construction this far, and I did it in advance because I'm just kind of limited on space here when we're doing the webinar. So I wanted to have this pre-done in advance so that I could just walk you through it, and it's really quite a simple step to do. First thing you want to do when you're doing something like this, because there will be something hanging. So because there's going to be something hanging, I want to make sure that I have a really firm, solid, heavy base to design in. And so I have this ceramic container. It actually has gook stuck to it from my workshop. We don't need that. There we go. And it's a nice heavy ceramic container. Now if you were going to be doing this in fresh, and again, you can easily do this exactly the same way in fresh that I'm doing it here. It's just you're going to be using fresh flowers. So I've put my foam in, and in this time, of course, I've glued it in because it is permanent botanicals I'm using in dry foam. You could glue in your wet foam before you wet it. You could go ahead and glue it into your container. If you're going to do that, because this is a keepsake container, it's a nice container. If you're using it for fresh, I recommend putting a layer of duct tape down on the base of your container, on the inside of your container, a nice solid layer of wherever the foam and the glue is going to touch. Put down a layer of duct tape. Duct tape will stick, it will hold even though it gets damp. But what it does is it allows the flower receiver to remove that foam. It just pulls right off of the duct tape, and then they can remove the duct tape. Now it is on there firm, so it will be hard to get off, but it will come off and it will not ruin the inside of the container, and then that way you're not left with something glued. I do that when I prep for holidays too, and I'm going to be using a glass container or something, and if I'm using the glue method, which quite honestly I don't use a lot anymore, but on occasion I will, I'll make sure I use that duct tape method so that I'm not damaging the container. And if you ever have somebody bring in one of their containers where you need to glue into it for a permanent botanical, please be sure to use that duct tape on that bottom so that you're not ruining their container, because they'll come back in a year or two and want you to freshen up that design, and you may have to remove that foam. You certainly don't want to have all that glue stuck to their container, especially if it's an antique or an heirloom container. So use that little trick whenever you have to glue something into a nice container that you want to protect. Now, a little trick here, if I were using fresh foam and I did glue it in, I would still tape it. I would go that extra measure and make sure I still taped it in. Because you just never know with the glue and the water, sometimes it will release, depending on how it was delivered, how much it's been handled. You just don't ever want to take that chance, do you? So go ahead and tape that in just in case. But now I've got this glued in here. I've got a nice solid all the way around without taking my chandelier out. You can see it's pretty much solid. Now, if this were for fresh flowers, I did leave a little room in here for water, because you cannot completely encase the inside of your container with foam. You need to leave a little space where water can be added. Otherwise, you're just pouring onto your foam and you're not getting as much saturation or as much of a water collection that you need for the longevity of your flowers. So always make sure you have just a little space where they can actually pour water in after. But this is permanent botanical, so I don't have to worry about that. It's something I did want to show you. Okay, so then what I did is I took my river cane, or the bamboo, and I cut it to the length, the overall length I wanted it, is how high I wanted it. And then I wanted to make sure that it went all the way into my foam, almost touching, stopping, where I couldn't push it any farther, so it reached the bottom. So I knew that was about another 3.5, almost 4 inches, based on my foam up here in my container. So I cut off all the pieces in advance, and then I stuck in the vertical placements of the cross one at a time, and they are glued in. So I dipped the river cane into my pan of glue, got about 1 inch to 2 inches of glue on the bottom of the cane, and then inserted that as straight and as vertical as possible because I didn't want to start getting things crooked right down into the foam where I wanted it to go. And then I just continued on with the other 4 pieces. There are 5 total pieces on the base here, the vertical part of my cross. And I'm going to try to bring this up closer so you can see. You can see where it's glued right in there. So that's not coming out. I can actually pick up this design by this cross. Now, would I do that? Not necessarily. But I'm not going to be the only one moving this or touching this probably. And so somebody might just come along and grab it by that. And if I hadn't secured these into my foam properly, they may not stay. And the whole thing might start to fall apart once it's on site at the funeral home, because we don't know. If we're not the ones placing our flowers for the funeral, and we're just putting them in the flower room and driving away thinking our job is complete, we have to make sure that no matter how that design is handled, that it's going to stay intact. And so I wanted to make sure. Now, you could actually still do that if these were fresh. You could go ahead and insert, put them in the glue pan and then insert them into the foam. It's not going to hold quite as securely into the wet foam, but it's going to add a little extra protection. And you know what? That's enough for me. If it's even a little more than if I didn't do it, I'm going to go ahead and do it just to make sure this is secure. Then I came in with my cross pieces, and I actually took several stems. I just took several stems, laid them in my hand, took a glue strip, I laid them in my hand, I took a glue strip and wrapped it around it. That created my crossbar. And then I added a couple more, and I added another glue strip. And then I inserted them in between, not right in between the vertical bamboo, and then I just raised it to the level I wanted it. Once I had that in place, I took some of the paper-covered vine wire, secured that on there, crisscrossing in the front and in the back, and then I covered it with the raffia, just for a little bit more natural look. So glue, wire, paper-covered wire, and the strips are my mechanics to make sure that this stays together. And it's also going to hold the weight of my wind chime. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do another kind of a vertical, not quite all the way up here because I want the structure of the cross to be seen. So again, I'm going to start with just a few pieces of the moss, just tucked into some of the nooks and crannies that might become visible. And because I'm going to have some horizontal placements in this, I do have my foam raised a little bit. Now, I also raised it a little bit because I wanted to make sure I had enough foam to hold my mechanics. So it's kind of a dual reason why I have that foam raised like I do. So now I have some moss just tucked around the edges. Again, I'm not putting it on the top because if I were to cover that whole thing in moss, one, it's going to make it a little bit harder for me to insert my stems through the moss. And I want to work as efficiently and as quickly as possible, so I don't want to create any obstacles in my way of designing. And two, I would use way more moss than I actually need because the flowers and the foliages I'm going to use are going to cover a lot of my mechanics anyways. So then after I am done or near done, I can come back in and add the moss into the little holes that I see, and I've used far less moss, far less product than I would have if I would have tried to cover that entire thing with moss. Okay. Grab my flowers here. One moment, please. Okie dokie. Now again, I'm going to start with my vertical placements. And I have a kitty cat who's going to jump up on the table. Yep, and there he comes. And that would be Olaf. Watch out, kitty. Go on, go on. You're not here. Go on. There's just no avoiding that. Okay. And of course, using the permanent botanicals, we have all the beautiful varieties of flowers, like this apple blossom or cherry blossom, and it's in this beautiful shade of lavender. Nice to have that for the tough stems. One more of these. What I'm trying to do here is I'm actually kind of encircle this, kind of almost create a natural caging effect around the base. And then I'm going to come back in and tuck my flowers in and have some growing up naturally. This is kind of an interpretive type of design. I'm taking my cue from a vertical design. I'm taking my cue from a vegetative design. And I'm kind of just putting my own little twist on it. And that's the fun thing about design. And even though we know and we need to follow the elements and principles, I'll never forget when my very first floral class I took back in high school, our instructor gave us a sheet of paper that listed all the elements and principles and all the rules that we needed to learn. And we had to learn those. And we all went, wow, that's a lot to think about for floral design. And so throughout the course of the year, we learned and we practiced and you know, we sometimes failed and had to practice some more at them. And then at the very end of the year, after we'd learned them all and we practiced them all and we mastered them all, on our graduation day, he told us we were able to break the rules because we finally understood them and we were able now to break them all. Because we could understand why they were necessary, and then we could use our own interpretation and our own creativity to bend those rules and to make them work for us. And that's what art is. If you're just a designer, then you'll stick to the tried and true elements and principles. But when you're a floral artist, you learn to break those rules and expand those rules. And that's when the fun begins. I'll go ahead and use my cutter over here. Now I'm using some snapdragons here, and they're in that same kind of shade of white and lilac. You can see, like I did in the last one, I grouped my flowers together so the Gerber daisies had more impact. The same thing I'm doing here with my 3 stems of snapdragons. I'm grouping them together so all together they have more impact than if I had one over here, one down here. They would still be pretty, but you wouldn't be able to see how beautiful they are, and you wouldn't have that strong impact. And I'd have to have a lot more flowers to fill in all the gaps between the one over here, the one over here, the one over here, the one over here. So I'm creating that by grouping them together. I'm just making it a little more impactful and actually spreading my budget, giving it perceived value. We all know what that is, and how important that is. Got a beautiful hydrangea I'm going to add towards the base. making those impressions on our customers is important, but also making those lasting impressions on our funeral directors is really important. And I hope those of you who are watching today, especially if you're in a retail flower shop, I guess if you're not working in a retail shop, it really doesn't pertain to you. But you know, if you are and you're not building a relationship with your funeral director, or you don't have one already, you're really not doing the most you could do for your Sympathy business. We really need to establish those and nurture those relationships. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. And I'm sure Dan's going to cover some of those in the marketing section later. But really, you know, getting to know them, visiting them on a regular basis is so important. Letting them know you're out there. I mean, that you care about their business as well as yours. Making sure they have proper promotional materials, selection guides that they can use to help promote and sell your flowers. If it's a generic selection guide, then they're really just selling everybody's flowers, aren't they? But if it's specific to your shop and it has your name on it, or better yet, you establish a relationship with them so that you could actually go into their funeral home and set up your designs and take photographs of your flowers in their funeral homes, and then create a selection guide just for them. Wow, you know, that's where you take it to the next level, and that's where you make that lasting impression with the funeral directors. Come around here to see where I need this. Well, this is more of an all-around design. So I'll turn it around once I get a little bit further here, but you'll see it's actually all around. Now I actually have a couple left, little tulips left from my other design, so I'm going to use those. Because again, this, as I said before, we're just kind of pretending that this is going to the same service. So I want to make sure I've used everything I've ordered in for it, making sure I'm, you know, spending my money wisely. Now it's time to add a few little pieces of foliage before I get a little bit farther and add in my last blossoms. And I'm going to add some fern into this design. Just kind of give it a little, more natural look, and it fills out the bottom. Because I have a lot of my flowers coming up, but I want to have something that's kind of coming down and cascading. And you know, the ferns are definitely, that's kind of their natural way of growing, is they don't always just grow up, they also grow cascading down. Another good place for you to really help grow your funeral business, your Sympathy business, is from your website. How many of you actually have a page on your website that's dedicated just to Sympathy work? And not just to the Sympathy work, but also to, you know, some of the etiquette about ordering flowers and some of the important information we have on how impactful flowers are, especially to the bereaved. If you share that information with your customers, it makes sense to them to order flowers. If all you're doing is showing pictures of, excuse me, of flower arrangements that were created by somebody else, then you're really not doing yourself a good service. Get that information on your website, because anymore, your website is that first impression. It used to be they would walk into our shops, and what they saw and how we greeted them was the first impression. That's not true anymore. People shop on the web. And
Susie, I have a question for you.
Yes.
When you're reading left to right, should the tallest items be on the left?
When you're reading left to right, should the tallest items be on your left? It doesn't matter.
Okay, tell me why.
Well, if what I'm hearing is, should the taller items in a design be on your left?
Yep. So should your eye be going down?
No, it does not. It does not have to be that. Now, if you're doing a display, if you're creating a whole display of a lot of arrangements, then you want your taller, you want your more statement pieces to come down and flow. And for two reasons at a funeral, because when the casket is sitting there, and if it's an open casket, you're viewing from the left to the right. So you want your big pieces, your impactful pieces, your tall pieces to start here, and then you want things to slowly slope down and cascade maybe down to the floor. But in design, you don't always have to start left to right. You can do right to left. It's okay. That's one of those, there's no rule that says everything has to be taller on the left. That would be like our L-shaped arrangements. They don't always have to go left to right. They can go right to left. So in design, you don't always have to design that way. Especially if you're a right-handed person, you tend to do that. It's just kind of, it's because it's kind of like a muscle mind memory thing. That's what we do because we're a left to right society. But you don't have to design that way. You can design right to left.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, let's see. Where did I was using my leftover hydrangea blossoms to kind of come in and fill in some of the holes. Got some beautiful Dusty Miller here. It's really kind of amazed me how that whole lamb's ear Dusty Miller look has really come on so strong. And it's staying around for a while. Cut that up. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of use that the same way I used the fern out to this side. I'm going to use the Dusty Miller out to this side. Now the only thing I'm doing on this side is I'm kind of leaving a space open on this side because this is the side here. And I've deliberately made this a little askew so that when I put my wind chime, the weight of it will help straighten out the crossbar here on my cross. But I'm leaving just a little space open here so that when it hangs, it doesn't necessarily get tangled up in the flowers. It's going to look like it's all part of the same garden, but you'll see it. I don't want to get too much coming out here so that it interferes with what I'm doing there. And I still have a few more of my branch that I want to use. I'm going to go ahead and got my cutter back here. I need my cutter up here. There we go. I don't know what I'd do without that. Okay, as you can see, it's starting to take shape all the way around. So I still have a little area right in here that I need to finish. And that's actually my area I'm trying to leave a little bit open. So I'm going to take some of my moss. I'm going to tuck my moss in there. If the moss isn't staying where you want it to stay, you know, you can take a little greening pin or make a little hairpin out of a piece of wire or even out of an old stem you have sitting around, a thin stem. Here's one. I'm just going to take that, bend it so that makes a little hairpin, and I'm going to use that to help my moss stay in place. Now I do have one other little, it's kind of like a larkspur. I'm going to come in and add in to the design. Just a little bit. I want it to kind of come out over the edge. And I can always adjust. That's the good thing about using permanent botanicals. I can always adjust a lot easier than I can with fresh flowers. Once I hang my wind chime there. But really I'm keeping everything in here really tight. I just want to bring some of that color of that flower down in so that it's not bare or looks like it's not finished, but I don't want it to come out this way because I don't want it to get in the way of the hanging wind chime. Come around to the front. Clear off a space here. We have...
Susie, hold on one second.
Yes.
Our internet went down here. Let me ask everybody else if you can still hear us well.
Hello, everybody. Can you still hear and see? You could just give us a quick little type in that, yes, you're still connected and we're still on.
Of course, I'm asking if they can hear me, and if they can't, then it's kind of a moot question.
Well, I can hear you. So if your internet went down.
Nope, I got a lot of people saying yes, they're good. Okay.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you.
You just never know technology. We love it. We can't live without it, but boy, does it sometimes make our lives miserable when it's not working. So here's another design with another one of our features we have, which is our there we go. Excuse me for the reach, but they are fountains. And maybe if I stand away, it is a water fountain. You can actually, you know, I'm just going to come right around because I want you to see this. I'm going to come right around here. We're all friends. It's okay. And you can see it's a little water fountain. And it has a little lamp, a little light that changes colors that you can add. And so you have muted sound of the waterfall, which I can hear, but you probably can't because of the computer volume. But it's just another little way that movement and that light and water is so soothing. When you add that amongst the flowers and you put that in a setting at the funeral home, it's just really going to create a lovely setting and make those lasting impressions. Yes, that is water.
One thing to keep in mind is because that's a little small fountain, that the water will have to be refilled regularly. So make sure you tell the funeral director about it, and as you're there often, maybe give them a little vase of water or bottle of water to keep it there so that they can just keep adding to it. It's a small water reservoir. Some of it will evaporate. This particular style doesn't splash, but some of the others, some of it might splash out. And you're not going to notice it splashed out because it splashed on the flowers and into the foam. So just something to keep an eye on. Nice thing about these fountains is they're battery operated or plug-in. So at the funeral home, they can run on the battery, but when the family takes it home, they can plug it in and it can run all the time.
And this is one of those things that if you do visit your funeral home every day, you can check on the water level. You can check to make sure the batteries, if you're using the batteries, are still working. You can do those follow-up visits where when you're selling something like this, you're selling a service. And you really need to be able to follow through on that service. Gone are the days where we can just drop off the flowers to the flower room and think our job is done. We have to think of new ways to keep that business going. I wanted to show you my mechanics on this. I used that same treatment that I did on the stone. I actually put a piece of the U-glue strip onto the fountain, put my stick, and then cover it with one more. And I have those on two sides so that I can insert that right down into my foam so that I know it's going to stay. Now it is a little, I mean, if it gets knocked over, it's going to fall out because one, this comes apart. But at least I know if it's sitting there, it's going to be completely secure where it needs to sit. And mechanics are really important when you're using keepsake items because you don't want the keepsake to fall and break.
And then how are you going to cover that mechanic, Susie?
How am I going to cover what mechanic? The mechanic on this?
The mechanic cut with the U-glue and hyacinth.
I would just take a little bit of moss and attach that to it, but honestly, you don't see it in my design.
Okay, because the flowers in the back?
Because the flowers come up around it. The flowers come up to the edge. But honestly, you could take a piece of moss and cover it. You could take a little piece of ribbon if you wanted to do that and cover it. There's really a lot of different ways you could cover it. And
yeah, I was just thinking since it's going to be taken out by the family, whether or not you want to put an extra little something on there.
Well, you also want them to see where the mechanics are, and when you sell this, you are going to tell the family when you're taking that order how they're going to receive it and what they're going to need to do, because they're going to think, well, I can't set it up because it's not going to stand. It's got this here. So you're going to tell them how to take it apart so that they can use it at home afterwards. That's part of your instructions when you're selling the order. But honestly, all you would have to do is take off that. Here I left the white on. It's running. I'm gonna turn it off. There we go. Take off this little piece here of the and then just take your moss right over that. There you go. And now you have it. I know you can't really see it because of the darkness, but I just put a little piece of moss over my little sticky. So I just removed the paper, and that held the moss on there.
Yeah, I think that extra little detail is something for them to pay attention to.
Okay, I've got another one here. One of our lamps. Let me get this turned on for you. We just did a program a week ago, and I want to have the big reveal, and I forgot to put the bulbs in it. So this time I have the bulbs in it, Dan. The memory lamps are just a beautiful, lasting gift that I think really, really make a nice statement in the design. The whole reflection of the light is symbolic with funerals and sympathy. And then I just created kind of a low, round design. It's actually in one of the paper maches. The Recreations paper mache, so it looks nice, but you could do that in permanent botanicals or fresh. Have your lamp. We also have another lamp here that I didn't secure this in, and that's going to be the question. How do I secure this lamp in? Well, I'm going to show you, as opposed to having done it. I would take a wire and bend it. You have to kind of measure where it is so that you have the right length. And you form like a little hook. And you take 2 or 4 of these, depending on the weight of the lamp. And you would not deliver it complete. Don't try to do that. You're running a risk. Even though you got it in there really securely, you just never know what's going to happen. So something that is heavy like this, you would not want to deliver complete in the design. And I would recommend the same thing for the fountain. It's going to spill water. It needs to be placed once it's on site, not when it leaves the shop. And so you have to train your delivery people to make sure they're doing it properly. And if you're providing complete service to the funeral directors, that means you're going in, you're helping set up the flowers, you're arranging things properly, and then you have the time to make sure all those items are complete in your design, so you can put in the fountains, you can put in the lamps and secure them. So then once you have the lamp and you're on site, you put it into your design, and then you take this hook and you put them over the top of the base. Now, it's not going to keep it in there completely and tightly forever. It could still fall out if this were on a pedestal and the pedestal got knocked and it tipped over. If it were on a table and, there's, little children running around and they bump into it, it's not 100% secure, but if you put 3 or 4 of these little hooks, brackets, out of heavy wire around it, and then you can just take a little bit of moss and cover up those mechanics, it will hold that in securely enough that you can be assured, unless it's really bumped or knocked over, that's going to stay in place nicely as it sits on a table. The same thing could go for the cross. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to put the lights in this, but we also have the cross, which is a beautiful addition to a centerpiece as well. And you could put the mechanics in there the same way, or you could do the method I did where you put the strip and then put your stake and then put another strip over it and do it at least in 4 places. And that would sit nice and secure. And then do a couple brackets over this way. A couple of these brackets like this over like that. So you'll have things going into the foam as well as secured this way. Something like this, you really don't want to run the risk of it just toppling out. And I've actually seen things do that at the funeral home. There's nobody around and no one touched it, and everyone's sitting there, and a chair will topple out of an arrangement because they just set it on top of the flowers or on top of the foam and didn't use some kind of a mechanic to secure it in. If you don't use a little something, it's going to pop out. It just will. Just the natural vibrations of people walking on the floor, of people looking at the card, whatever's going to happen. Make sure you secure your keepsakes into all your designs so that you don't have any mishaps. And I think that's all I have, unless somebody has any questions for me. Well, if you do, you can always email us at service@creationsbyfitz.com. Fitzdesign.com. I don't even know our own email. Boy. Or you can call us. You can type in your questions here yet before the webinar ends. Either way, if you need us, we're here for you. And I'm glad that you were able to join me this morning. I hope some of you will be returning this afternoon to Selling the Wow, our afternoon webinar, where we're going to do some fun designs, a little bit kind of something different than we've done. We're going to kind of go off our class, and we're going to do some brooch corsages and brooch pieces. So I hope you're joining us there. And if you haven't signed up, you still have time to sign up for that. So I hope to see you there. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. I'm going to let Dan take it from here, and we'll see you on another Team Training Tuesday webinar. Thank you.
Actually, I've got 2 questions.
Oh, okay.
Would you use the lamp on wet foam? You did yours in permanent, so you're on dry foam. But if they're doing a fresh arrangement, would you put the lamp on the wet foam?
Well, some of the lamps, like this one right here, has felt on the bottom. So no, I would not, because that would ruin that felt. All you need to do is take a piece of, what's that called? Like a gator board. It's like a plastic foam core type board, and just cut out a little piece, or even a little liner, something that's going to not seep or let water through. You could take a little plastic liner and cut it out. But something a little heavier than just a piece of plastic like this. You want it to be something solid and firm so that this can sit on it, nice and firm. So I would do something like that, because it will, especially for the lamps that have the felt bottom. Now this one doesn't have a felt bottom, but I'm a little leery when it comes to electric and water. So I'm going to make sure that I remove that from it, that possibility of this getting damp. Also, you know how long it's going to sit on there. Even a little bit of wet, a little bit of moisture can start to make things rust a little bit. So you would want that to happen to the screws on the bottom. So I would also put a little something down. Just take a plant liner, cut it so that it fits, or take a piece of that gator board, just get a sheet of it, and then you have it on hand whenever you need to do that. And that's a nice firm space for your lamp to sit on.
Another comment is the plastic from the rose packaging, stiff inner pack plastic.
That might work, but it's not stiff enough. That's still pliable and bendable. So you're not going to get that nice flat surface. And that's what you want. You want it to almost be like it's sitting on its own little table. You could try it. If you can get it secured in there, that will work because it's thick enough, but just make sure then your foam is nice and level and flat.
And here's a tip from Amy. Bend one of the legs of your hairpins in the shape of a U. Take one of the legs and bend it back toward you. That way when it goes into the foam, it'll help lock itself in and things won't slide out as often.
That's a great idea. Just make sure you're not doing that on something that's too thick. If it's too thick of a hairpin, like if you've used something this thick for your hairpin, If you do that, you're actually going to crush the foam. So on your small hairpins, like a regular gauged wire, that's a great idea because it will help hold that securely. Thank you for that tip. Anything else for me?
Comments are coming in. Give me just a second.
We really appreciate your comments and your feedback. That helps us learn if we're doing things right or if there's more information you need. We develop our webinars for education programs based on your feedback. So we really appreciate you taking the time and giving that to us.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay.
Great job. Super. Thank you, Susie.
Well, now, Dan, take it away. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next webinar.
Okay, one more second on the poll. Okay. Susie did a great job. Thank you very much, Susie. Okay, we're going to walk through some sympathy marketing tips. Let me share this with you first thing. This month's floral management, and this is the cover, and if you get the electronic version, it's already available, is their sympathy issue. And as you can see, it says stake your sympathy claim. They have some great ideas of shops, challenges they faced, how they've overcome them, sharing comments and things for them that are very successful, and found a lot of really good tips and ideas in it. So I'm going to walk through and share some things, some of them in a little more depth, some of them Okay, I'll start over. My Fitz rule number 1 needs to be turn the microphone on. I apologize for that. I have a separate microphone that I use for these webinars, and I forgot to turn it on. Okay, so let's do this again. My job is to challenge you. And as I said, that nobody heard, it's either to inspire you or to upset you. And I've done this program a few times, and I know that there are points in here that do both. But it's important to me that I cause you to think differently. You don't come here to just sit and watch and keep doing the same thing over and over. So I'm going to make sure that that we're inspiring you. The second, this is Fitz rule number 1, do your homework, know your stuff, be prepared, and have fun. Often I get people saying to me, how am I supposed to have fun doing sympathy work? And part of my answer is take a look at the volume that you do, how much money you're being raised, and then also understand what you're really doing about taking somebody's loss and their mourning and putting it into a beautiful tribute that reflects both the deceased life and the sentiment of those that are there. So make sure you're doing what you can to enjoy this part of your business. There are challenges to it. There are always going to be challenges to it, but make sure that you have fun with it. My definition of marketing, we talk about this often, is things that can be measured. And as we go through here, you'll see the things that you can keep track of to sell, to see whether or not they're might be some Memorial Day wreaths, but there are some selection guides. So one of the things I'd say to you is, what percentage of your business is sympathy work? And if it's 10%, 20%, 40%, do you have a display in your store that reflects that same amount of business? Now, I'm not saying give it the same amount of floor space, but I am saying, are you giving it as much space and recognition as the amount of volume that it's bringing to you? Are you taking the time to put that together? So is the volume that you do reflected in your store? If you do have a display, is it current? The same thing in the wedding program. Do you have a consultation area? A real consultation area, not the lunchroom, not the table that sits out there that's supposed to be the consultation area that gets used for everything else. But do you have a clean and neat place to sit with the family? So here's one thing to think about. As you're visiting with the family, do you offer a package deal? Do you say, here is a casket spray, 2 side pieces for X? Are you thinking that way? Are you offering those types of things to make the decisions easier for them? Doesn't mean everybody does it, but again, it's a question to cause you to think differently. Do you have strong suggestions for them? Do you take the lead on a lot of things? And then one of the things that we talk about is, do you understand what the sales volume that you need out of your sympathy business to meet your sales goal? And then at the same time, do you know how many pieces you need to sell, and your average piece needs to be X? So as you're sitting down and you're working with the family and you're leading them, are you also making sure that their needs and your goals are lining up at the same time? Are you selling something that's fitting and working into your averages? Okay, selection guides. In a lot of flower shops, I see selection guides, and I remember the first time I had to order a tribute piece. Went into the flower shop, and they just gave me the selection guide. And I went through it, and I was totally confused. Didn't know anything about pricing. Didn't know what I was looking at, what I was supposed to be looking at, what was appropriate for me as a friend. So just because you have selection guides, are you taking the time to walk through a few minutes at the beginning and say, okay, here's what we're looking at. The family typically does the casket piece. They may do 2 side pieces. You're going to do something that accents it. How long have you known them? What do you know about them? Do you know about their favorite colors, their kinds of flowers? What's your favorite color? What are your favorite flowers? Take a few minutes to walk through with them and give them some quick guidance about how they might be looking at the selection guide. And then I'm a big believer in everything has to be priced. If it's not priced, they don't know how to look at it and don't know how to respond. You can put a number of disclaimers on it that says this is priced based off of what you see. If we make changes, then the price will change accordingly. Then what are the add-on items that you can sell? I think this is an area that gets missed often. So if it's a veteran, for example, do you have the flag frames that you can offer to them as an additional sell-on piece? What are all the types of different keepsakes you have? And Susie showed you a bunch of them with the lamps and the fountains and the cherubs and the plaques, and we've got rosaries. Not only us, but lots of people have different keepsake type things that can go into the arrangement. And even if they don't go into the arrangement, it can be an extra sell. One of the things about lamps is we hear from a number of florists that lamps are often sold to family members who weren't able to attend. And that here is a keepsake that will be for you. How about if we order you a lamp and send it to you, or send it to the family? So keep in mind about what are the other things that you can sell, and especially keepsakes. Make sure that you're showing your creativity. Selection guides are rather universal, and I understand that. So do you do some of your own selection guide pages? Your display, do you have creative things there? And do you have a look or a style or certain pieces that add in, that make that design and that creativity yours, that people can look at it and go, I know where that came from. That is so-and-so's normal look, that they're familiar with that. Okay. Oops, I think I missed. Outside your store. Here's some different ways to think about things, and I'm pretty firm on these. This is that area that's going to either inspire you or cause you to get aggravated at me. Either one means I'm doing my job. Treat the funeral director like your customer, not as an employee, not as an enemy, not as an adversary, but treat them as a customer. Treat them as a bride. Excuse me, go out of the way to take care of them. You know the amount of business that they help bring to your store. You also know the amount of business that they can move away from your store. So make sure that you're taking care of them. In the Floral Management magazine, there was an interesting portion of an article about a man, florist went to a funeral directors convention, and I would suggest you do this at least once. Go get their perspective. Go to a funeral directors convention. But he went to a funeral directors convention. He's talking to a funeral director from a town a few miles away, and he knew who they were. He didn't service them, but he knew the florist that did, and asked him, you know, how about this florist's work? Do they do a good job for you? He said, you know what? I never see that florist. I don't communicate with them. I guess their stuff is okay, but I don't know very much about them. Go and see them. See them often. See them regularly. Again, treat them special. The other way to look at this, still treating them as a customer, is to keep in mind that they really might be your best salesperson. And again, in the floral management, one of the things you'll see is there was an article about funeral director sold out, new owner came in and moved all of the business that was going from that one florist to another one. So make sure you're staying in touch with that. Don't get to the point where you're comfortable that you've got that business. Things do change, and you want to make sure that you don't lose that. One thing to keep in mind about funeral directors is they care about what's most important for their business. And that's what you do too. You care about what's most important for your business. So when they tell you it needs to be easy to move, it's got to be lightweight, it can't be bigger than this, you may feel like that's a crimp on your style. But if you're treating them as a customer, if a customer asked you to do that, you wouldn't object at all. You just go right ahead and do it for them. So realize that they're thinking about how it works in their flow, and you want to figure out how it works in your flow and how both of you can make it go together. But if you treat them as a customer, I think you'll find that you respond differently to them. Okay, another sensitive point. Are you available 24/7? If you're not, the choice to be or not to is the choice you make. Again, in the magazine, it talks about the number of times that there is orders that come in at peculiar hours, and in many cases they're very large orders. This month's Floriology magazine is also their Sympathy issue, and there's an article in there about a florist who calls themselves 24-hour florist. And one of the things that they realize is, especially when they get a Sympathy order in the middle of the night or at an odd time, that most of the time it is a very large order. But again, to be available 24/7 or not is your choice. And if you choose not to, just realize that if your competition chooses to be available 24/7, then that's a good portion of the business that's likely to go to them. The funeral director wants to deal with people that make it easy for them, that wants to realize that it's about their business and not just about your business. The choice is yours. There's no question about that. But whether or not you want to grow your business, and this might be a step where you can go to the funeral director and say, you know what, I'm going to be available for you 24/7. Here's my cell phone. I'll do whatever I can to make sure your business runs smoothly, because it's more important to them than it is to you. This is something we know, but sometimes we forget. But it was interesting that it popped up in a recent survey of funeral directors, that one of the most important things that a funeral director finds value in the florist is to help creating that soothing atmosphere that can be done with flowers like it can't be done in any other way. So make sure that you understand that you're setting the mood there. You're doing things for them that can't necessarily be done with anything else. Music can help, but flowers do it quicker and faster. The other thing is you want to be able to create a comfortable area in as many different senses as you can. So hearing, smelling, seeing, touching. Look at making sure that you understand all of those different senses that you're a portion of. You get to create beautiful. Okay. It is not a kickback. Stop saying that. And I hear it from florists over and over and over. The choice to pay them a commission is up to you. It is not a kickback. It's not extortion. They're not the mafia. They are doing the same thing you do. They're asking for a commission to help send business to you. Stop calling it a kickback. You give a negative connotation to all of your employees, everybody you deal with. It's a commission. It's a bonus. It's any number of things, but it is not a kickback. Now, interesting comment that came out of the survey is that 81% of the funeral directors said they don't get any commission at all. So 4 out of 5 are not getting any commission at all. So it's not necessarily as big of an issue as we might want it to be. If your funeral director does not get a commission, again, you might want to be proactive and go and offer them a commission before one of your competitors goes and does. And then the funeral director is going to do what's best for them, not necessarily what's best for you. It's a commission or a bonus, something else, but stop calling it a quick kickback. It is earned. One of the things to keep in mind is if you got a wire order in and you lost your percentage because you got a wire order, you wouldn't fuss about that. So it can be the same amount or even less. But if you're going to do it for a wire-in order, just view the funeral director as someone who's wiring an order in for you and be appreciative of what they're doing for you. Okay, I talked about this a little bit. Talk. Visit with the funeral director all the time. Remember, they care about what's most important with them, but spending the time talking to them is your chance to also teach them what you want to be able to do. One important thing is to make sure you know who all the people in the organization are and not just the funeral director. The lower staff people often leave. They get replaced by new ones, and if you don't know the new ones, then you may be having a weak link in the chain. Now, here's something I suggest. I don't recall if I talk about this later. I'm sure I do. Here's something I suggest. What you really want is private time with your funeral director. What you really want is a private appointment to sit down with them and say, here's what's important to me. How can we do business together? Here are the things that we're looking at. Now, you get to choose. You can have all of that time in one 1-hour appointment, or you can have a whole lot more than that time, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time. So one of the things I suggest is every single day, go to the funeral home and refresh and fix your flowers. Again, it's more about them, more important to them than it is to you. But if you go in there every morning, you're going to be the only one there. You're going to demonstrate by your actions that your work is so important that you want to make sure that it's refreshed all the time and it's kept clean. Flowers that are broken from being moved are replaced. Hydrangeas or gerbers that don't hold up are replaced. And every day you do that, you get a few minutes to, 1, demonstrate, and 2, visit with the funeral director and share a little bit about your business and your challenges every day. Another idea, schedule a private showing for the funeral directors in your community. Set up your display area with half a dozen, 2 dozen different looks, and invite the different funeral directors to come in maybe every hour and a half, every 2 hours, one at a time. It's a private showing. Have new ideas, styles, and looks for them to look at. Let them tell you what they like, what they don't like. Ask them to pick them up, handle them. Is this going to be easy to move? What do we need to change for you? Do you like this? If you're just bringing it into the funeral home and asking them to stop what they're doing and look at your arrangement, that's not likely to happen. But when you've got them one-on-one in your store and ask them to do that, they're going to do it. One of the things you want to make sure that you do to reduce the amount of stress and strife is eliminate the objections first. Reduce the problems ahead of time, and you can do that by twice a year, 3 times a year, having them come into your shop and look at the different things that you could be offering. Again, I can't stress this enough. Treat them special, extra special. Realize the amount of influence they have in your business. Look at little things like gift cards or a dinner certificate, tickets to special events. You know they like the symphony. You know they like baseball games. A little something that's just a small gift, a token of your appreciation, especially if you've got one of those 4 out of 5 that you're not paying a commission to, just your way of saying thank you, the same way you do to employees, the same way you do to important customers, just a special way to say thank you and say it more often. This we talked about. Go see them every day. Personalized selection guides. Susie at Heaven Sent Flowers in Bonita Springs showed me the first one of these. She took a number of selection guide pictures and her own pictures, and using Shutterfly, she created her own hardbound book. On the cover of that hardbound book, she put the name of the funeral home, so it looks like it's the funeral home's book. So they can sit down and give it to the family and tell them to look through it. Everything is priced. There are a number of packages, and a package is their best seller. And then the nice thing is if prices change, you just go to Shutterfly and you print off a new one. Put in the new pricing and print off a new one. If you want to add new styles, you've done your analytics, you see certain styles aren't selling, take those out, add in some new ones, print a new one. If I remember right, she told me they run about $26, and compared to a selection guide, that is considerably less expensive. So selection guide photos and also your own photos, you make it personal for you. It's easy. Anybody can do it. Okay, order gatherers. This is something that is becoming more prevalent in the sympathy business. But the single biggest way you deal with this is to make sure you're talking to the funeral director. Make sure you're telling them what happens with order gatherers. And there's, again, a story in the floral management about someone who placed a funeral casket spray. And it was time for the casket spray, time for the funeral. The funeral director called the florist and said, "Where's the casket spray?" After they looked into it, because it came from an order gatherer, there wasn't enough value to fill the order. They rejected the order. The order gatherer did not go back to the funeral director and tell him the order was rejected. So now it's time for the funeral. The florist calls, and the funeral director calls and complains to the florist that there's no casket spray there, but it really wasn't the florist's fault. The key, though, is it took this event for the florist to stop and explain to a funeral director what an order gatherer is, how the numbers work, how orders get rejected, and to make sure that they're not encouraging or asking people to use order gatherers. This same rule applies to in lieu of. The more time you spend talking to the funeral director, sharing with them how this has an impact of your business, the more likely they're going to be supportive of you. So a lot of people talk about going to the newspapers and asking them not to print it. That can be another strategy. But talking to the funeral director can also be important. Just ask them not to use it. I'm not going to try and solve all of the issues about in lieu of today, but I can tell you one key way to keep it from popping up is to make sure that you're talking to the funeral director about it, and you're teaching them about your business the same way they're teaching you about their business. Ann Jordan is the first one who shared this with me. Ann was a part of our design team for many years. Go to the homes. Do your consultation in the homes, and you will see your prices go way up. Go and sit with them where it's comfortable to them. Bring your selection guides. Don't bring your selection guides. Walk around the home. Ask them to show you things that were important about them. Ask if you can borrow them to put them into the arrangement. I've never heard anybody say that when they go to the home and ask, "Can I take this piece? I want to work it into the arrangement." There has never been anyone to say no. If they went to my house, they'd want to include a fishing pole, maybe a picture of my boat, pictures of my grandbabies. But you're going to see that in their home, and your creativity gets sparked when you see these things that you know that you can work into an arrangement that changes that gift or that thing that was given to them to now become even more special because it was the last thing that they dealt with them about when it went to the funeral. So use as many personalized keepsakes as you can. Okay, technology. Your websites have to be beautiful. You need lots and lots of details so that they know what it is they're looking at, how the prices work, things like sizes, things that they don't know anything about. Make sure that they've got lots and lots of information. Then the question for you is, if you've got a really good sympathy business, should you have your own website for sympathy? I know there are florists who have their own website for wedding. I even know one florist who has their own website for prom. But should you look at having your own website just for sympathy business?
And then again, everything has to be priced. The newer, younger generation, that's what they deal with. You'll find things are a whole lot easier when they're priced. Yes, you can put your disclaimers that say, as shown, the pricing is as shown. If there's going to be changes or tweaks to it, then the pricing will adjust accordingly. Great idea. For your out-of-town customers, take pictures of the arrangements of the pieces that are going there and email them to them. Remember, these are your customers for the future. If they've moved from there and they've got family and friends from there, that if this is well taken care of and well handled and they have a good relationship with you, the next time it happens, they're going to remember to call you, asking for the email address so you can send them a picture of what was sent to them. One of the things to try and make sure you do is include some type of reference point about how big it is so they can get a feel for that other than just seeing a picture. And remember, today our society is much more of a mobile society, and that the families are moving in and out, and when they do, those orders need to come back to the hometown, and that's where you are. So make sure that you're doing that and you've got all of that. Okay, that's it for me today. What kinds of questions do we have? Jamie, you have any questions for us?
I have nothing.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you this afternoon at Selling the Wow. And then this afternoon is a loose format on the marketing. We want you to share your ideas with everybody else about what works for you about upselling, especially during prom. So thank you very much. Have a great day. We'll see you this afternoon.